the ITV Weekend News with Bill Neely.
Good evening. Equally reviled and revered, Alastair Campbell, Tony Blair's closest advisor and the man many people considered to be Britain's real Deputy Prime Minister, resigned today. He said it was to spend more time with his family. But questions were immediately raised about the timing, 2 weeks into the Hutton Enquiry, with which he was so inextricably linked. Our political editor, Nick Robinson, is in Downing Street tonight. Nick.
Bill, that in a nutshell is why Alastair Campbell had to go. He tells us he's going because he wanted to get back to a normal family life. Already people raise doubts about that. It is in the end a fatal problem when you're the government's Director of Communication, when you say what you've been saying in private for months, but in public, people simply won't believe you.
Cheerio.
Turning his back on number 10, the backroom boy who became more powerful, more famous than many who sat round the cabinet table. Back home tonight, Alastair Campbell having finally carried out his promise to his family to come home for good. Earlier, I asked him whether it was the Hutton Enquiry which had forced him to go now.
My departure is related to the events that I've set out in my statement, and I'm not going to say anything about the Hutton Enquiry because I don't think it's appropriate to do that. I leave because my family and I want me to leave at this time, and I leave with nothing but good memories of my time in Downing Street and my time working for the Prime Minister in opposition.
Good memories, you say. What about regrets? Do you now regret the ferocity of your attack on the BBC? Do you regret the way David Kelly was handled?
Well, again, you can ask me the same question as many times as you like, but I'm not saying anything about the Hutton Enquiry.
You know what people will say in what they write up about Alastair Campbell, the man who brought spin, an obsession with appearance, an obsession with image and the media to Downing Street. Do you think that was positive?
People can make whatever judgment they like. All I've ever done, every day that I've worked for the Prime Minister, is do the job to the best of my ability, according to the values and principles that I hold, and according to the policy agenda that this government has. That is what has always guided me. And I think people sometimes underestimate the extent to which, if you're doing a job like this, and you're taking the pressures that you're taking, and you're working the hours that you work, you do it because you believe in it. And you don't believe in it because you might get a good headline here or a good news bulletin there. You do it because you believe in the change that you think the country wants from the people that it's elected. And the people it's elected are the Prime Minister and the ministers, and they're the people ultimately who make the decisions.
Forgive me, there'll be people watching say he's at it again.
Well, people can say what they like, and you can be as cynical as you like about anything that I might say. I know what I stand for, and I know what I believe, and I know what I've done in this job, and I know what I will continue to believe in outside this job. Now, you know, frankly, you get so used to people questioning you, speculating about your motives and all the rest of it. I know what I stand for, I know what I believe, and I know that every day I've done this job, I've done it to the best of my ability, according to those beliefs.
Is politics over for you, or is there a role for Alastair Campbell behind the scenes still, and perhaps in Parliament as well?
I'm not going to stand for Parliament. Politics has always been a passion in my life, and always will be. And I will continue to take an interest in and be involved in politics in some shape or form. But how I do that, time will tell.
When do we see the diaries?
Well, that's, again, something you'll have to wait for. Thank you.
Not that long, though.
What?
Not that long?
I think we said 6 questions and you're on to 12, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tonight at the paper he once wrote for, The Mirror, they're planning a fond, if somewhat hyped farewell to the man who taught the government to talk tabloid. Nick Robinson, ITV News, Westminster.
So the King of Spin hangs up his crown, but he leaves Tony Blair at one of the government's most difficult moments. It's the end of the Campbell era in Downing Street. So can we expect a new style? Here's our senior political correspondent, John Ray.
If he needed final proof his time was up, then this was it. The King of Spin had come to symbolise the sins of a government he did so much to create. At the Hutton Enquiry, no longer shaping events, but in the eye of the storm, he helped whip up.
And I tell you, until the BBC acknowledge that is a lie, I will keep banging on.
As he toured the TV studios, he'd shattered the first rule of his calling. He'd become the story. For 9 years, he's watched over his boss, his friend, his ally. Now he exits the stage, leaving Mr. Blair to cope without his closest confidant.
He was the brains of the spin machine, Tony Blair was its heart, and as long as Tony Blair is in Downing Street and this government is in, I'm afraid this culture of spin is going to continue.
They were the odd couple, the committed Christian and the confirmed atheist, the public schoolboy and the tabloid journalist. He was a poacher who turned gamekeeper.
But you are cutting down on the number of lobby briefings you're giving?
How do you normally get interviews? You phone the press office and they say yes or no, and I'm saying no, okay? Bye.
He had that obsession and genius with news, so that he really saw the whole of politics through the prism of news, and that, I'm afraid, became the hallmark of the government itself.
Alastair Campbell's job let him witness history. Moments of history made him write some of its most memorable lines.
They regarded her as one of the people. She was the people's princess.
What I say to you now, as your queen and as a grandmother, I say from my heart.
In shaping presentation, he shaped policy. He was powerful because he knew the Prime Minister's mind. Some joked, sometimes better than Mr. Blair himself.
The Prime Minister, as I said, right at the outset, would never ever allow the Labour Party to play the race card.
New Labour has now turned to old Labour. Dave Hill, former party press chief, takes the number 10 job.
Well, the great thing in many ways is that David Hill is not Alastair Campbell and Alastair Campbell is not David Hill, so there will be a freshness.
Confrontational and colourful, he's spun a tangled web. Whatever happens to his boss, suddenly Mr. Campbell has cut himself free. John Ray, ITV News.
Alistair Campbell was paid to put the government in a good light. His own image, though, was a different matter. He was renowned, among other things, for making enemies. But what's the man behind the image really like? Lauren Taylor got an exclusive insight. Here's her report.
Filming with Alistair Campbell, I discovered a side of him that's rarely seen. He was training to run the London Marathon in memory of a friend, John, and John's daughter Ellie, who both died from leukemia. During the intense build-up to war, he was also pounding the streets to raise thousands for research into leukemia.
Hold on.
He gave me unprecedented access to his family life. This was a skating party with his daughter. There he talked about the breakdown and battle with alcohol he'd had in the 80s and how his friend had helped him through it.
I think it was the breakdown that gave me the sort of inner strength that I've now got, because, I mean, getting through it and sorting yourself out after it, added to then living through John's death and Ellie's death. I think the combination of those events does give you a huge strength.
As I accompanied him to a race his son was running in, I saw just how much the job ate into his time with his family, who was constantly interrupted by texts and phone calls.
Hello.
He was also always adept at avoiding awkward questions. For instance, I asked him about Cherie's friendship with Carol Kaplan, which had led her to have dealings with the con man Peter Foster.
What about the Carol Kaplan thing? Do you think she's a good choice of friend for Cherie?
I think that's exactly the same question about exactly the same story, so I don't have anything to add to the many millions of words that have been said about it.
But seriously, it must have
I am being serious.
But it must have made a difference to the relationship between you, because you're having to deal with things which people hope is going to stay private and doesn't.
We are very close, and that's all of us.
And I saw at first hand the passion of a lifelong Burnley supporter. After they scored, I decided to tackle him on his own aggressive tactics.
Try to bully, correspondents and editors into not running things and not saying things.
I regularly have tried to argue with people not to run things that aren't true.
And he wasn't worried then about how his reputation as a bully would affect life after Downing Street.
I don't think I'll ever be short of work.
That's certainly true, but as he leaves behind the high-pressure environment of Downing Street, one thing I know he's afraid of is being bored, so deciding what to do next will be difficult. Lauren Taylor, ITV News.
Well, back to Nick Robinson now, who's at Downing Street. Nick, if there is a surprise in this resignation, it's in the timing. What do you read into that?
It is purely in the timing, I should say, Bill, because he has told people privately for many months that he did want to go, that it was time to move on. I think, in truth, it was probably just the least worst time to go. Any time he went during this terrible row about the tragic death of David Kelly, people would make the connection between him going and those events. If he waited till the end of the Hutton Enquiry, people might well have said, aha, he's going because of what Lord Hutton said. At least now he can go having put across his version of events, having it backed up by the head of the Joint Intelligence Committee. But it is proof once again of that old cliche, isn't it, that all careers, all political careers at least, end in failure.
And if there's one word that haunts this government, it's spin. He was the king of it. He's gone. Will it go with him?
What do you think, Bill? Of course it won't. Spin won't go because all political parties in all parts of the world do it. They want to present themselves well. But Alastair Campbell knew one thing, that politics was about impressions. And the difficulty was that the impression he had helped to create was a connection between Labour, spin, and then terribly and tragically, the death of one man, David Kelly. Perhaps his going will break that impression, give the chance for a fresh start. It was unfair on him. He'd made a massive contribution to this government, but he was professional and good enough to know that's simply how it is. Unfair sometimes.
Nick Robinson, thank you very much. Well, still to come on the